Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm Ian Gallanar, your host and the founding artistic director of the Chesapeake Shakespeare Company in Baltimore, Maryland. With me is Ron Heneghan, our education director at the Chesapeake Shakespeare Company. And we're delighted to welcome Patrick Spottiswoode from Shakespeare's Globe today. Patrick is a great friend of the Chesapeake Shakespeare Company, and we're so glad to have you. Thanks, Patrick, for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. President, for sharing this conversation.
I almost called you Pat. That would have been terrible.
Yeah, anyway. That would have been terrible. Yeah.
So let me introduce everybody to Patrick. If you don't know him, Patrick Spottiswoode joined Shakespeare's Globe in 1984 and became founding director Globe Education in 1989. There are now 32 permanent members of staff and over 100 freelance staff in the department who work with over 120,000 people of all ages and nationalities every year, from preschool to professor. Many more engage with the department through outreach, online resources, school editions, and scholarly texts. I think, Patrick, you were the first employee of Shakespeare's Globe. Isn't that right?
Yes, I'm employee number one. There were employees before me, but I'm the oldest. You know, I'm the old Adam of the organization. You know.
Got it. In 1995, Patrick established Read Not Dead to celebrate and promote all surviving English plays performed between 1567 and 1642. These performances with scripts are presented in the indoor Sam Wanamaker Playhouse, which is quite a stunning thing, and are recorded for archive and research purposes. A Read Not Dead website will be launched in 2020. Patrick launched Plain Shakespeare with Deutsche Bank in 2006, which is the United Kingdom's most significant arts education project. Over 18,000 free tickets for a Globe production. Over 18,000. That's impressive. For a Globe production created for young people are given to high school students every year. The production is complemented with workshops for students and teachers, as well as with online resources. 40,000 people had booked tickets for this year's Macbeth, but the run was sadly cut short when all the theaters in London were closed because of the virus, and we had a similar experience in Baltimore.
I'm sure.
In 2000, Patrick established the Globe's first Shakespeare Studies MA with colleagues at King's College, London. It's now the most popular Shakespeare MA in the UK. In 2017, Patrick established the Center for Teaching Shakespeare in Diverse Classrooms at UC Davis with colleagues in UC Davis's School of Education, our friends out in California. And here comes the degree part.
The degree part.
It's like a long hair.
Oh dear, it's so embarrassing.
First of all, let's say Patrick was president of the Shakespeare Theatre Association 2011 to 2012, and the Globe hosted the STA conference, we call it STA, which was a terrific experience, and is a proud recipient of the Burbage Award from the American Shakespeare Center. That's our friends down in Stanton, Virginia. In 2011, he received an honorary PhD from the University of Warwick. He became an honorary fellow of King's College London and was awarded an honorary PhD by the University of Sussex in 2018. And those diplomas are not behind you, Patrick.
Sorry, they're not. No. They're in a bottom drawer somewhere. I'm sure yeah. I didn't really earn it, you know. I didn't write a PhD thesis. It's a bit of a cheat to get honorary ones. It means you didn't do the work. Yeah.
Yeah, but you still get to wear the hat.
Yeah.
Patrick, I'm so glad to have you join us today. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Lovely. I have to say, you know, your dear friends, and I think of you every day because still to this day, every day I go shopping using my Brave New World Chesapeake Shakespeare Company Star Conference bag. This is the best bag ever, folks. And so I thank the Shakespeare Company for my daily shop.
Thanks, Patrick. You know, that's what we do here. We create Shakespeare performances of Shakespeare education programs and top-notch.
Well, some people don't do either, you know. Yeah.
Great. All right, Patrick, you know what?
Yeah.
I'd love it if you wouldn't mind sharing. You know, I just want to get a sense of, you know, your early connection to Shakespeare and theater and performance. So, what do you have an early, like a first memory of either watching a performance or being involved in a performance that was significant for you?
Yeah, I mean, bizarrely, my first experience with Shakespeare was in my Latin lesson at the age of 12, and on the Ides of March, my Latin teacher gave me the Friends, Romans, Countrymen speech and told me to stand on the desk and read it. And this was extraordinary, not so much because of the Shakespeare or my performance, but this was kind of sanctioned anarchy. That you were allowed to stand on a desk in my school was just beyond, you know, beyond any possible thought. So it was very, very exciting just from the anarchic point of view. But what was also exciting was to speak the lines rather than read them at the desk, and in a way to perform them to a group of kids standing around that desk. It was quite empowering and exciting. So, but you know, it was just one speech on the Ides of March. But it wasn't really until I was in a show, that's when I was 16, 17, probably 17, and I was in Twelfth Night and at school. And it did two things for me. It I think, turned on the light for me, but it also made me very, very aware that I should never, ever become an actor, which was the greatest gift to the theatre profession the school could have given. There has never been an Orsino like mine, and the world is grateful for it. But again, it was just tasting that language, owning the language, playing it, that gave it sense. And it's ownership, isn't it? It's about connecting personally with the language, and that's what really helped, I think. And then at university, I had just some great teachers and some inspiring professors, scholars who changed my life and made Shakespeare more of a mission than something you did on Friday night, you know, when you went to the theatre.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So how connect the dots for us, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
How did you get from, that was Warwick, right?
Yeah.
University. Yeah. How do you get from there
To the Globe.
to Shakespeare's Globe?
Yeah, well, it was I mean, I'd taken an MA in English and European Renaissance drama at Warwick, and I stayed on to work on a PhD. And I wasn't really getting very far. I wasn't enjoying the sort of social isolation that research enforced on me. And so I was struggling a bit. And someone said, look, just take a break and get a job. I shuddered at the idea of getting a real job in the real world. It was quite a frightening thought. And I saw an advert, a little advert in the newspaper saying that this American chap was building a globe and wanted someone to help. And my immediate thought, I have to say, was anti-American, and I was sort of American at that time. My mother's American. But I just thought this is such an American Disney idea to rebuild the globe. And I thought this is really stupid, but hey, it was a job and I was going to be able to use my passion for Shakespeare. So I applied for the job and got it back down in '84. And I really took it for 1 year and then was going to go back to my PhD, and I still haven't left because again, what seemed a silly idea suddenly became, over the course of my first year there, became an essential idea, a key idea as to connecting the text with the theatre and with the audience. And I stayed, and then it became a passion, it became my life. So yeah, but it was happenstance really. I fell into the job in 1984. I don't think anyone else wanted it, to be quite honest. No one was stupid enough to join a charity that had no hope of building the Globe. But I joined. It took a long time to get the Globe built.
Right. So what's interesting to me, what I'd be interested in hearing about was, your mission as you were education director right away, or did you?
No. We had Sam Wanamaker, our founder, the American actor director who founded the Globe project, had bought a little building close to the Globe and set up a museum there. And it had a little theatre. And if you've ever seen Looking for Richard with Al Pacino, it starts in the little theatre we had in that museum. And it was leaky roofs, hardly anyone came, but I was asked to create a new exhibition within the museum and to start an education program for elementary schools, high schools, universities, and to run a theatre in the evening. And, and I had no help. So it was a sort of 24/7 job. But yeah, that was my job initially, was just to try and give a profile to the project, a place where people could come and learn more about it. And then eventually in '89, the project grew and my work grew, and I had to make a decision. And I started focusing just on education. I created the Globe Education Department.
So how do you live up to the mission? How do you promote the mission of the Globe when the Globe wasn't built yet?
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, it was about informing the public about the theatre building industry, the late 16th, early 17th centuries. One was kind of doing imaginary backstage tours of theatres. We had this program with our National Theatre. Students would go for a real backstage tour at the National and then come for an imaginary one with us. And ours was always better, even though we didn't have a back or a stage. So it was fine. But it was starting some Shakespearean performance programs for undergraduates. And we now have a burgeoning program for over 1,000 undergraduates come every year for courses. And yeah, just trying to share that mission about why we build the Globe, and teaching about the architecture of the Globe at a time when people really didn't care. No one really cared about the original architecture as we do now. No one cared about the actor-audience relationship that the Globe creates, as theatres all around the world are doing now. So it's really just trying to sell that message, and also to sell engage our local community and our elementary schools and our secondary schools, and get them excited by this idea and get them excited about working with Shakespeare with the Globe in mind.
So you asked the question, so I'm going to ask it of you, why?
Why the Globe?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's interesting because when I was at university, no one ever really referred to the stage on which the plays were performed, right? And when I was at university, the plays were taught, well, I was in the English department, so they were taught as texts rather than as scripts. I remember going for a visit to Stanford University, I don't know if it's still the same, and the plays in the bookshop were shelved under poetry. They weren't even shelved as drama. So, but the idea that these plays were written for a specific set of playing conditions was not really of great interest to people in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, until Sam Wanamaker comes along and says, hey, you know what? There is a dynamic relationship between the text that Shakespeare wrote and the stage he wrote these plays for. And Sam had a ideological belief that, the theatre at Shakespeare's time was the most popular time for theatre ever in our country. And maybe if we rebuild the type of theatre that Shakespeare had, we could make theatre much more and Shakespeare much more popular than it was. Yeah, that there was something about the structure edifices and the spaces that our 19th century, 20th century theatres had that made them less social and less about the community and more just about the art. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really Shakespeare, it's a Freudian slip. Wanamaker very much had the people and the audience in mind. He really longed for theatre and Shakespeare to be popular. And in a way, in the 80s, it really wasn't. It was quite middle class. And so that was a sort of mission. And so, yeah, why the Globe? Because we do believe in the 3 A's of the Globe, actor, audience, architecture, that the very architecture helps create a dynamic between actor and audience that Shakespeare explored in his plays, and that it releases an energy and a complicit relationship between actor and audience that you just don't get in a proscenium arch theatre with lights.
I think I want to let Ron ask some questions too, but I'll bring up the it's very interesting because you know, in the United States, that idea of that the architecture is important, and that the term we use sometimes is original practices, that those things are important to us. Kind of in the landscape now, that goes without saying.
Yes.
You know, even folks that are doing theater that's not like that certainly can be informed by those things, and that's an extraordinary difference, I think, between, you know.
I think, yeah, and you know, if we look back, you know, the wonderful Oregon Shakespeare Festival built its Elizabethan stage. Gosh, I can't remember, in the early 50s, late 40s, and there were Shakespeare Globe type theatres, but they weren't really. What happened in Shakespeare festivals in the 50s and 60s and 70s is that the festivals built a kind of Elizabethan stage facade. And that's what you know, and then you just built an auditorium facing this Elizabethan stage facade, and people sat just like they did in a regular proscenium arch theatre. And so the Elizabethan nature of the stage was very faux. And I think what Sam did by bringing, I mean, I think the most revolutionary, radical thing the Globe's done and is bringing in a groundling audience, an audience that stands in the pit, in the yard around that stage, because that brings in an energy that you just don't have if you're sitting in serried ranks in a proscenium arch theatre. And when I was at university, all the books were called things like the Shakespearean stage, the actor and the stage, the Jacobean and Caroline stage. There was very little about audiences. The audience didn't seem to be important. For Sam, the theatre began with the audience, right? Why do you want them to come? Why are they there? How are you going to move them? How are you going to use Shakespeare to transform, and theatre to transform lives? But to do that, you've got to think about the relationship between the audience as a community and the actor on the stage. And I think that was the great gift that Sam gave. Since the Globe opened, the power, the energy, the dynamo that the Globe, the groundlings are, has influenced other theatres around the world now. And people are trying to imitate and find ways of securing that energy. And doesn't just mean having people standing, that's not the answer, but just trying to get that close collaboration between actor and audience. But I think that's relatively, dare I say, relatively new.
Yeah. What do they, Patrick, let me ask you, what do they tell you? What does, when the audiences experience that, you know, specifically the people that have stood, but that energy that you talk about, what do they tell you afterwards about their experience?
What do they tell you? I mean, I think you can hear it in the response they give to the show. I think the Globe is I would say the Globe is a playground. So people don't go in there to worship the altar that is high culture or high art. They go in there for play. It's why students, you know, kids love the Globe because and are totally unabashed. They can be quite difficult because it can be very noisy as they are in a playground. They have no sense of theatre etiquette. It's just a place where you go and play. And so that notion, that freedom of the sometimes that stiffness of this is Kultur, as the Germans say. This is Überkultur. This is Shakespeare Kultur. This is storytelling. And this is a way of that we're engaging as a community with a story. I think one of the great things about the Globe is not just, of course, that crowd, and we brought the crowds in. It's the fact that we are all standing or sitting in the same light. I think it's as important that the audience can see each other as the actor can see the audience. You know, we talk a lot about actors and audience sharing the same light, but it's also important that the audience can see each other, that they feel part of the community. Because in most theatre, I'm saying most, what am I saying? But in the kind of the established Broadway type West End theatres, you go in there and the first thing they do is get you to sit down because they don't want you to have energy. And that just kills your energy. And the second thing they do is they turn the lights out. So you can't even see each other as an audience member. And you're focusing on the stage, what Wagner called the Gesamtkunstwerk, you know, and the Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art, has got nothing to do with the audience at all. But in the Globe, the total work of art means that you involve the audience. Yeah, the audience is part of that work of art, and I think that is a great shift. And so I think audiences feel liberated, and we do tend, I think, still to this day, end our shows with a jig. I don't think historically every play in Shakespeare's time did end with a jig. Certainly not with the kind of jigs that we do. But it's a way of saying, hey, this has been played. Right, you've engaged in a few hours of imaginative escape and play, and yeah, it's you can feel the energy, you know, with the Globe audience, and that tells you a lot.
I know Ian has another question, but I wanted to quickly just bring up, because our education program, we've reached out now and we're working with active military and veterans, and I know that that's some work that your Globe has done. Can you talk about that sort of mission as you see it in terms of the work that's being done there?
I think it's broadened that, and we haven't done a lot of work with veterans. We haven't done a lot of work, but I think again one of the fantastic things that's happened since I joined the Globe within our Shakespeare community are the ways that different Shakespeare festivals are reaching out to different communities. There's so many types of community. There's amazing work done in the US of A with friends of mine in prisons. You know, that's something that's not an area we've worked on. But we have done a little bit of work with vets and with PTSD, but not a lot. And I would not claim that we're experts at all in that. In fact, what we did was we worked with a company and provided the stage space and some of our practitioners to work with that company, and then they created play on our stage, because that's what we try and do. We open our doors. We can't be experts in everything, but what we can do is facilitate, and because what we're keen is that people of all communities come to the Globe and taste it, and then we hope they want to stay and taste it some more. But you know, it's again about breaking down those barriers, you know, opening the doors, knocking down any wall that prevents people from looking in, walking in and working in the Globe or working in theatre. And that's one of our jobs in education. Our jobs, isn't it, is to knock down those walls, those perceived walls. They're not only financial. Some of them are pedagogical. That's our job. It's to knock down the pedagogical wall, you know, that, you know, makes people think it's work, it's study, it's desk bound, and not about them. They start looking for answers rather than exploring issues. Yeah.
So I want to ask you about the reaction, a different reaction to that. This whole notion of, you know, sharing the audience and the experience and breaking down barriers. I mean, we're in Baltimore, Maryland, and there's sometimes negative reaction to work when we try to do that thing. And I imagine, well, I know that there was and is some reaction, negative reaction to doing the kind of work that you do. How does that manifest itself, and what's that all about, you think?
I think there is still a little bit of residual snobbishness in the theatre, in some areas of the theatre world, about us, that we are a storytelling concept rather than a directorial concept idea. And I mean, it started because people thought, oh, you know, Globe, why rebuild? Why rebuild a theatre of 1599, you know, with no roof, for goodness sake, with an audience standing around a raised stage and with no opportunities for dry ice? I mean, how can you do Shakespeare without dry ice, you know, and no lighting effects, and the designers went in. So this idea that Sam got hit with this idea that this was going to be Disney by the Thames, right? And so it was a great suspicion. You must remember that when he started the project back in 1970, the theatre was in the grip, under the influence, quite rightly, of the fantastic Polish critic Jan Kot, who wrote this book, Shakespeare Our Contemporary, back in the 50s, which influenced Peter Brook, all our great directors at the RSC in the early 60s kind of drank Jan Kott's work. That the fact they were trying to make Shakespeare as contemporary and therefore as relevant about now as possible. So do we. But they said, but I think the presumption was, oh, you're trying to build a 1599 theatre, you're turning it into a Renaissance festival. And that's exactly what we're trying not to do, that the theatres were saying. And it's exactly what we don't want to do. We don't want to turn it into a Renaissance festival. We want to make Shakespeare accessible to all, but through the prism of the original working conditions. But our plays are not Renaissance festival plays, they're very much plays for now.
Ron, do you have something? I've got a question, but I don't want to hog all the time.
No. I think Patrick, where do you see what happens, beyond the immediate future? But what's the future? Do you think of the work that we do?
Well, a huge question, and a real question for us right now. The immediate future, we just don't know, do we? We don't know when we reopen the theatres. We don't know when. We don't know how the public are going to react to being in crowds post the lockdown. We also don't know how amenable schools are. I'm very worried about this at the moment. Whether schools are going to come on outreach activities. I think there'll be a nervousness for quite some time because of the virus. We know that many of our undergraduate programs, visitors from the United States, many of our university programs are cancelling the fall program. They're not bringing students across. I hear that one or two major universities are not actually teaching in the fall, which is extraordinary to me, or they're going to go via distance learning. So that immediate issue is one we've got to tackle and think about. How do we come out of that? And then I think
just for our purposes, and then at some point there's a vaccine, and then the public comes back. So maybe it's 10 years from now. What does Shakespeare look like in terms of that?
I think there are two things. I think one is what Shakespeare is going to look like across the world. And then there's about the globe. And I suppose our strength is that we are so much about original playing conditions. We're so much about that architecture and that actor-audience relationship that the latest technology, using film on stage, whatever, hologram, whatever it is, kind of is the exciting new fad of the time, technologically. That doesn't really have an impact on us. We remain a space about the word and about the word engaging with storytelling, engaging with the public. However, I think quite inevitably, attention span. I think, will people in 10, 15 years want to spend 3 hours in the theatre? That's a big question. How much will Shakespeare be taught in the future in schools? Big question. Shakespeare's coming off the curriculum across Germany at the moment. Shakespeare was one of the leading authors, German authors. I mean, the Germans regarded Shakespeare as absolutely German. After Goethe and Schiller, it was Shakespeare. And he was compulsorily taught. But now various states across Germany are slowly taking him off the curriculum. But these things come in fads. Shakespeare survived every generation because he has something, I think, I say teach isn't the wrong word, but we have something to gain, to learn from Shakespeare, we can respond to Shakespeare and mold. I say mold. I've always said that I think the thing is that Shakespeare gave us clay, wet clay. It's still wet. The paint's not dry. And every generation, therefore, can sort of mold Shakespeare and adjust Shakespeare to suit the issues that they want to confront. So at the moment, what are we trying to confront? We're going to be people are looking at play. People are looking at the ecology. Eco Shakespeare is very big at the moment because that's an issue. We're looking at gender equality in our staging. We're looking at actors with disability and having more actors with disability on our companies, about opening up in that way. So Shakespeare, every theatre responds to the community's needs. And I think that's the great thing about Shakespeare. He's there, he is, look, just take me, mold me, shape me. I'm here for you. And I'm here for you, whatever the generation, whatever the time. But you can use me to say something of validity for your time and your community.
I sometimes say that I'm an artist and the medium that I work in is Shakespeare.
They would say that?
And the medium that I work with is Shakespeare.
Is Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to talk because we're fast approaching running out of time, but I do want to ask about the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse and this idea of Shakespeare's contemporaries and writers of that era. For those of you who don't know, the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse was built, gosh, how was it, 5 years now?
Something like that, yeah. 4 or 5 years ago it opened, yeah.
An indoor, I don't know if it's the right word. How do you, what word do you use? Yeah,
well, it's important for us to show that when Shakespeare was around, the company we was with didn't just perform at the Globe, they performed in indoor venues too. So we wanted to find an indoor theatre of the period. Now we have no plans of any indoor theatres of the period, and we then discovered, or the plans for the earliest theatre we know of in the UK were discovered back in the 1970s, I think, and those plans survived. We thought originally they were plans for a theatre built in 1660, in the year Shakespeare died. It turns out they were probably plans of a later period, around about 1660, 1661. But they're kind of an amalgam, but an idea of what indoor theatres, some of the indoor theatres at that time were like. And so we used those plans. And so we have an extraordinarily beautiful, intimate seats and stands around about 320, depending on the production. And it's candlelit, and it's real candles. And, as some colleagues say, it's rather bizarre that we have a candlelit theatre right next to a Globe theatre with a thatched roof. And we've been allowed to have both in the modern age. But it is an exquisite jewel of a theatre, a little jewel box, compared to the kind of more muscular giant that the Globe is. Mm-hmm. And so we use that year round for all sorts of events and productions, new plays, Shakespeare's plays, plays by Shakespeare's contemporaries, concerts, readings, youth theatres, adult theatres, all sorts of things. It's a wonderful venue.
No, I imagine the different kinds of plays, show themselves differently between the Globe and the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse.
Yes, and of course the late plays of Shakespeare were written for the Globe and the Blackfriars Playhouse, the indoor theatre, and it's really interesting to see how they work. But it's interesting to see how all plays of the period really work in candlelight, and how you can use candlelight, and it's creates very different mood, different sense of intimacy, different atmosphere than the Great Globe. But I urge people when they come to try and have a look at the Wanamaker. I think you can download some films of productions in the Wanamaker. So you should, the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse. So yeah, go out and have a look. As well as we're, by the way, screening on Mondays performances from the Globe itself. So we just had Hamlet on. We've got a Macbeth coming up, a Romeo and Juliet coming up. And people can get on YouTube, and so it's free and look at those shows.
And for those people who have not seen them, I mean, it's obviously not the same experience as being there, but they do a great job of recreating the experience.
Yes, and the audience, I don't think the audience gets in the way. I think the audience helps the purpose, helps the story rather than getting in the way. Yeah.
So before we get to our lightning round, I want to ask one more question, and it's the sense of community.
Yeah.
And the obvious community for the Globe is the Globe.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of at the center of it all. But I'm also very interested in the work that you do in your neighborhood, I'm not. Is it? Do we call it South London? You don't really call it South London.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, our immediate borough is called Southwark, South
Yes.
Warwick, Southwark, which is in South London, and that's a major community for us, a very important community for us. London is an important community for us. The UK, I mean, it's the micro to the macro.
Yeah.
Really, and we think about communities and different communities. You know, the vets that Ron was talking about, that's another community. Working with special educational needs kids is another community that we work with. So it's, yeah, I mean, we basically, our mission, our passion is to share the globe and Shakespeare with, I say as many people but to really try and invite as many communities into the globe and to share the work as possible. And that's always been a passion, a mission.
At our theater, we say that Shakespeare's for everyone,
Yeah.
and the only way to prove that is to really have it be for as many people as you can. You know, to have it be for
Yes. Yes,
everyone.
but it's finding how to reach different communities. That's the key thing. That's difficult.
And it's not the same. It's not the same for every community.
No, exactly.
Different entryways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ron, do you have anything before we finish up? A thought or a
No, Patrick. When you were here though a few years ago, you got to experience a Maryland crab feast, and I'm wondering if you have taken those skills that you learned of how to eat a crab, if you've used them since.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm, you know, all your friends are going to hate me now, but I didn't partake because I'm allergic. But I enjoyed watching other people wrestle with the show. Absolutely wonderful. No, I didn't. But I say, Ron, you know, I think I did a talk about communities. I worked a lot last year with the Polish community on a series looking at Shakespeare in Poland and Polish artists and writers' responses. And I came across a remarkable line that I think is so important for us in education. A Polish philosopher, I'm going to get his name wrong, Korzybski, who said, the map is not the territory.
Yeah.
And I think that is so important for us as educators, because I think all the schools, kids, and everybody, you know, we look at these plays and we try and understand them as a map. Yeah. And so we read Cliff's notes, Sparks' notes, and all these notes, thinking that's the meaning, rather like Lear. You know, he says, give me the map. The first thing he wants to do, he wants to understand. He wants to understand the plot. And it takes him a while, 5 acts, to understand the territory. And our job, I think, isn't it, is to forget the map, you know, the thing that they think Shakespeare is, and get them to explore the territory. So there's something we learn from our community. I learned from communities. I just think it's a very beautiful line. Yeah, the map is not the territory.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, it's time for the lightning round before we get
lightning round. Whoa.
All right.
Do I provide music for this, Ian? Do I provide sort of a steady sort of drum beat of
yeah.
I won't do that.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Least favorite Shakespeare play?
I never answer that question.
Mozart or Beethoven?
Mozart.
Kirk or Picard?
Who? Oh,
Captain
no,
Kirk.
neither.
Captain
No. I don't have a television.
A word.
At this. I'm losing.
A word in Shakespeare that you love.
Straight off the top of my head, and I don't know. Actually, the word I love at the moment is the word still.
Still.
It's going. My epitaph is going to be sleeps still. It's when Lear is asleep, and I love the word still. I'll still stay to have thee still forget. Romeo says. And that's what we're experiencing at the moment. Is just a period of stillness, which is both enervating and actually refreshing.
That is the most philosophical answer to the lightning round we've had so far. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm being pretentious.
You
I think philosophical is another way of saying pretentious.
Most superfluous Shakespeare character?
Gosh, my most superfluous. Wow, that's a complicated. That's not a lightning question. Wow. What do you mean by superfluous? What do you mean by superfluous?
Like, well, you don't need it. What's it?
The
What's
character.
in there? Huh?
Wow, that's a great question. Pass.
Okay, we'll come back to that one.
You're
Yeah.
getting D- in this, except for
I
you
know.
get points for the.
I'm in education. I don't do well at tests.
All right, Godfather Part 3, yes or no?
I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I'm English.
You're too damn educated for any of this.
I know.
All right, favorite play in the world?
He's so not like me.
You see, I'm not. I don't know why I don't like answering this. I usually say when everybody also asks me, "What's your favorite Shakespeare play?" and I say it's the last one that I saw that was done well.
Yeah.
I have to say, I mean, if I had to pick a Shakespeare play, I think I would probably pick Twelfth Night.
Oh.
And maybe that's because I was that great Orsino back in the day.
Man, I should have asked you more questions about classical music.
Yeah, you were fast on that answer.
Yeah, that was, well, it's interesting in the great Beethoven year, but yeah, that's a tricky question too.
I think Mozart is probably, as he's at least one of my mentors talked about Mozart being closely associated with Shaw in terms of the way that the line and the music ran. Because you get such incredible lines in Mozart that then you have that same sort of rhythm and tempo and length when you have Shaw. So he associated Shaw with Mozart.
And yet I like Mozart. I'd pay good money to go to a Mozart opera.
This is way too highbrow for me. You missed the Brady Bunch question. So anyway, Patrick.
Hey, that's my special subject, the Brady Bunch.
Is it?
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Yeah.
Patrick.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Hopeless.
Thank you so much for spending the time with us.
No, and warmest love and greetings to you all and to the company. And I just hope we all get back and get Shakespeare live again,
Yeah.
Get in the same room with that man.
Yeah, right back at you. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah. Bless, Ron.
Thanks, Patrick. Good to see you, sir.
And you, lovely to see you. Take care.